Mindweaver Kalen of the Zalosian Conclave settled his three spindly arms on the polished obsidian of the negotiation table. The gesture was meant to convey relaxation, a casual openness that his species had perfected over millennia of telepathic diplomacy. Across from him, the human ambassador, Elias Thorne, mirrored the posture with his own two arms, a faint, unreadable smile on his lips. To Kalen, the man was an infuriating enigma, a being encased in a fortress of silence. The Zalosians, a civilization that had blossomed in the warm light of communal thought, perceived non-telepathic species as handicapped. They were the silent ones, their minds cacophonous, disorganized prisons of isolated consciousness. Communicating with them required crude vocalizations and clumsy translations, a process Kalen found both inefficient and deeply pathetic. It was like trying to appreciate a symphony by reading a description of the sheet music. This negotiation, centered on territorial rights in the Cerulean Drift, was stalled. Thorne was a master of the human art of poker face, a concept that baffled the ever-transparent Zalosians. He offered platitudes and concessions that felt hollow, yet his biometrics remained steady, his speech even. The conclave was growing impatient. And so, Kalen had been given a clandestine directive: perform a shallow, passive psychic sweep. Ascertain Thorne's true intentions, his bottom line, the hidden fears or desires that could be leveraged. It was a minor transgression, a peek behind the curtain of his primitive mental isolation. Kalen felt no guilt, only a professional curiosity tinged with condescension. Ambassador, Kalen's translator drone-intoned, converting his fluid mental projections into the blocky phonemes of human English. We appreciate your patience. Perhaps we can revisit the demarcation points for the 6th and 7th sectors. Of course, Mindweaver, Thorne replied, his voice a smooth baritone. My government is committed to finding a mutually beneficial resolution. We simply must ensure the security of our trade corridors. Thorne spoke. Kalen closed his primary and secondary eyes, leaving the tertiary one, the organ most attuned to psionic frequencies, to focus on the human. He extended a tendril of pure thought, delicate as a spider's thread, towards the ambassador's mind. He had done this hundreds of times with other non-telepathic species. Their minds were usually chaotic storms of emotion and sensory input, easily navigated once you learned the patterns. He brushed against the outer shell of Thorne's consciousness. It was surprisingly orderly, not the roiling tempest he expected, but a neatly compartmentalized structure. Recent thoughts were filed away in accessible strata. The taste of the bitter brown liquid humans called coffee that morning, a flicker of annoyance at the drone's slightly tinny voice, a mental review of the star charts pertinent to their discussion. It was all surface level, all pertaining to the here and now. Disappointingly mundane. Report, a thought echoed in Kalen's own mind. It was Lyra, his handler, monitoring him from the Zalosian vessel in high orbit. Surface thoughts are clear but uninformative, Kalen projected back. The subject exhibits unusual mental discipline. The antechamber of his mind is tidy. He is consciously keeping his thoughts on the task at hand. Caution is advised, Kalen. The reports on human psychic potential are contradictory. Their subconscious is theorized to be unusually volatile. Kalen suppressed a ripple of amusement. Lyra was a notorious worrier. Volatile? This mind felt as placid as a stagnant pond. His mental discipline is a wall, not a fortress. A shallow dip into memory is required to find his leverage points. Nothing invasive. I will be as a ghost. The conclave authorized a passive sweep only. Lyra's thought was sharp with warning. And a ghost is passive, Kalen replied, already pushing gently past the surface thoughts. He dismissed her concerns as procedural paranoia. He was a mind weaver, an artist of consciousness. The mind of this simple, silent creature was his canvas. He slipped deeper. The sensation was like sinking through layers of water, each one cooler and darker than the last. He bypassed the curated memories of Thorne's diplomatic career, handshakes, speeches, endless meetings, and sought something more fundamental. Something personal. He found it. A memory warm and sun-drenched. A child, Thorne as a boy of perhaps 8 or 9 years, running through a field of tall grass. The sensory details were vivid. Kalen felt the tickle of the grass on his own conceptual limbs, smelled the scent of pollen and damp earth, heard the boy's breathless laughter. A golden-furred dog bounded alongside him, its bark a joyous sound. This was a place of safety, of pure, uncomplicated happiness. Kalen cataloged it, attachments to youth to simple pastoral life. A potential point of emotional leverage. Feeling more confident, he let himself drift further, a silent tourist in the Museum of Thorns past. He witnessed the awkward sting of a teenage crush, the pride of academic achievement, the grief of losing an elderly grandparent. Each memory was a self-contained diorama, neatly presented. It was all so categorized, so comprehensible. Thorn was proving to be a disappointingly straightforward subject. Where was the vaunted human chaos? The simmering, primal passions he had read about? Perhaps Lyra was right. Perhaps the real data was deeper still. The mission parameters were flexible enough to allow for it, if he was careful. Driven by a mix of professional pride and a flicker of boredom, Kalen decided to push into the unlit depths. He sought the basement of the mind, the place where traumas and core identities were forged. He found a door. Not a metaphorical door, but a literal construct within the mindscape. It was heavy, made of scarred, dark wood, and bound with rusted iron. It felt cold to his psychic touch, radiating a palpable sense of noli me tangere. This was it. This was where the real Elias Thorn resided. Behind this door lay the unvarnished truths, the volatile core he was seeking. He ignored the instinctual tremor of alarm that vibrated through his psionic tendril. This was just a subconscious defense, a standard mental ward. He had bypassed far more sophisticated constructs in his career. Focusing his will, he formed a psychic key, inserted it, and turned. The lock did not resist. It clicked open with an unnerving ease. The door swung inward on silent hinges, revealing not darkness, but a blinding flash of light and a deafening roar that ripped through Kalen's mind. He was no longer a disembodied observer. He was there. The air was thick with the acrid stench of cordite, hot metal, and something sickeningly coppery. The ground beneath his conceptual feet was shattered concrete and mud, vibrating with the concussive thump-thump-thump of heavy ordnance impacting somewhere nearby. The sky was a bruised purple, streaked with the angry orange of constant explosions. He was in a city, or what was left of one. Buildings stood like skeletal remains, their windows blown out, their facades pockmarked by shrapnel. The sound was a physical assault. The relentless crackle of small arms fire, the shriek of incoming rockets, and a chorus of human screams, raw and terrified. Kalen reeled, his psionic form flickering like a faulty hologram. This was not a diorama. This was a raw, unbound sensory feed. He had not just opened a memory, he had fallen into it. Panic, an emotion he rarely experienced, flared within him. He tried to pull back, to retract his consciousness, but the memory held him fast, its gravity immense. He was caught. He forced himself to process the scene. Human soldiers in gritty, futuristic combat armor were taking cover behind a ruined fountain. They shouted at each other in clipped, frantic tones. One of them, a young woman with terror in her eyes, was trying to apply a pressure dressing to a grievously wounded comrade. Kalen recognized the face of the young Elias Thorn on another soldier, his features tight with stress and adrenaline, shouting orders as he laid down suppressing fire with a pulse rifle. This was a war zone, a brutal, visceral memory of combat. It was the trauma he had been seeking, but its intensity was beyond anything he could have anticipated. He had to get out. And then he felt it. It was a subtle shift in the psychic atmosphere of the memory. A sudden, sharp drop in the ambient mental temperature. The chaotic noise of the battle seemed to recede, as if becoming background ambience. A new signal, cold and piercingly clear, cut through the static. It was a feeling of being watched, not by the soldiers in the memory who were fighting for their lives. This was something else, a gaze from within the architecture of the mind itself. Kalen scanned the ruined street. His psionic senses, far sharper than sight, swept through the rubble, past the fighting men and women. He found the source at the far end of the blasted avenue, half hidden in the shifting smoke from a burning vehicle. It was a silhouette. It looked like Thorn, wearing the same combat armor as his younger self in the memory, but this figure was different. It stood perfectly still amidst the chaos, not participating in the battle. It was simply observing. As Kalen's focus fell upon it, the silhouette turned its head. There were no features visible in the smoke, only a sense of profound, analytical stillness. And then the gaze locked onto Kalen's psychic form. It was not a look of surprise or anger. It was a look of detection, of identification, of assessment. It was the look a biologist gives a new specimen pinned to a board. In that single, chilling moment, Kalen understood a terrifying truth. He was no longer a ghost. He had been seen. The mind's immune system had not just detected an intruder, it had deployed a response. The figure took one step forward, then another. It did not run. It moved with a smooth, deliberate gait that was infinitely more menacing than any frantic charge. Its movements were economical, efficient, and utterly predatory. A primal fear, cold and sharp, lanced through Kalen's core. He turned and fled. He scrambled back through the memoryscape, pushing through the chaos of the battle. He could feel the hunter, for that is what it was, following. It didn't rush. It was pacing him, hurting him. The very landscape of the memory began to shift and conspire against him. A wall of rubble that should have offered cover crumbled as he approached, revealing him. A clear path was suddenly blocked by a burning troop carrier that hadn't been there a second before. The memory was not static. It was a dynamic hunting ground, and the hunter was its master. With a surge of desperation, Kalen threw his will against the boundary of the memory, seeking any escape. He pushed, not up and out, but deeper, hoping to lose his pursuer in the labyrinthine corridors of the subconscious. He tore through a psychic membrane, and the world dissolved around him. The thunder of war was replaced by a profound, humid silence, broken only by the chittering of unseen insects and the drip of water from enormous leaves. The air grew thick, warm, and heavy with the smell of wet earth, blooming flowers with cloying scents, and the rank odor of decay. He stood in a primordial jungle. Massive trees, unlike any in the Xylosian archives, formed a dense canopy that blotted out the sun, casting the world in a perpetual emerald twilight. Giant ferns, taller than he was, crowded a forest floor littered with the bones of colossal beasts. In the distance, a leathery-winged creature circled against a sliver of bruised sky. The atmosphere was thick with a sense of immense antiquity, of a world that existed long before concepts like diplomacy or civilization. Kalen felt a flicker of hope. He had changed the terrain. Surely the hunter, a product of a technological war, would be lost here. He was wrong. The feeling of being watched returned almost instantly, but it was different now. More diffuse, more patient. It was not a single point of focus, but an ambient pressure that seemed to emanate from the jungle itself. He was no longer being pursued down a street. He was being stalked in a forest. He forced himself to move, to put distance between himself and where he'd entered this new stratum of memory. His psionic form, ill-suited for this environment, snagged on thorny vines and stumbled over exposed roots. He was loud. He was clumsy. He was an anomaly, a rustle in the undergrowth to his left. Kalen froze. He extended his senses, probing the dense foliage. He detected a flicker of movement, a brief glimpse of scaled skin and a vertically slitted eye. A native predator of this memory world, something reptilian and fast. But behind it, deeper in the shadows, was the familiar cold presence. The hunter was using the jungle's own dangers. It wasn't chasing him directly. It was hurting him, nudging him with its psychic pressure toward the memory's natural threats. He scrambled away, his movements now frantic. He heard a low growl behind him and risked a glance. A pack of raptor-like creatures, feathered and vicious, had emerged onto his trail, their intelligent eyes fixed on him. But they kept their distance, wary of something even they feared. Kalen saw him then. The hunter. His form had changed. The futuristic combat armor was gone. Now he was almost naked, his skin daubed with mud and ash in disruptive patterns that made him blend almost perfectly with the dappled light of the forest floor. He held a long, fire-hardened spear in one hand, its tip stained dark. He was leaner, more sinuous, a creature born of this savage environment. He stood on a thick branch above the raptors, looking down not at them but directly at Kalen. His eyes, they were the same, cold, ancient, and utterly devoid of emotion. They held the calm, calculating patience of a predator that knows its prey is trapped and tiring. This wasn't just a defense mechanism. This was an adaptation. The ambassador's subconscious wasn't just a collection of memories. It was an ancestral repository of survival tactics. The hunter was the distilled essence of every human who had ever stalked prey, every ancestor who had survived because they were smarter, quieter, and more ruthless than whatever they were hunting. And in this moment, Kalen was the prey. The realization struck him with the force of a physical blow. He had thought he was a ghost in the machine, an invisible observer. Instead, he was a foreign organism, a disruption. He had triggered a primal immune response that did not seek to expel but to neutralize. To hunt, to corner, and to kill the threat. The hunter raised its spear slightly, a subtle signal to the raptors. They snarled and began to fan out, flanking Kalen, their movements coordinated. They were tools. The hunter was not just a participant in this memory, it was the apex predator, the master of its ecosystem. Panic gave way to a crystalline terror. Kalen had to escape the very fabric of this mind. He gathered the remnants of his psionic strength, ignoring the tearing sensation as he ripped himself from the jungle's grasp. The world dissolved again, not into light and noise, but into darkness and the chill of wet concrete. He found himself in a narrow, grimy alleyway. Rain fell in a steady, cold drizzle, slicking the brick walls and overflowing dumpsters. The only light came from the flickering neon of a sign high above, casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to writhe and crawl. The sounds were muted, urban. The distant wail of a siren, the drip of water from a rusty fire escape, the skittering of unseen vermin in the trash. The claustrophobia was a stark contrast to the vast, open jungle. For a moment there was nothing, only the rain and the cold. Kalen slumped against a wall, his psychic form trembling and strained. Had he lost it? Had he finally escaped? He saw a reflection in a puddle at his feet. A figure stood at the mouth of the alley, silhouetted against the streetlights beyond. It wore a long, dark coat, the collar turned up against the rain, its features lost in shadow. It was perfectly still. The hunter had adapted again. Here in the urban jungle, it was no longer the soldier or the primitive man. It was the stalker. The patient, modern predator who understands angles, sight lines, and the psychology of entrapment. It took a slow step into the alley, its footfalls making no sound on the wet pavement. Kalen scrambled backward, deeper into the alley, his hope curdling into absolute despair. He looked for an escape. The alley ended in a high chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. A dead end. Of course, it was a dead end. He had been herded here. The war zone had exhausted him, the jungle had terrified him, and the city was to be the killing ground. Every move he had made, every desperate leap between memories had been anticipated. He had not been escaping. He had been following a path laid out for him. He turned back to face his pursuer. The hunter walked slowly, deliberately down the length of the alley. It never rushed. It knew he had nowhere to go. The tension was no longer about a chase. It was about the final, inevitable approach. Kalen felt his sophisticated, civilized mind begin to fray, his thoughts devolving into pure, primal fear. Lyra. He screamed, a desperate, silent shriek into the psychic void. Help me. It's hunting me. It's hunting me. His cry was a pathetic whisper swallowed by the immense pressure of Thorn's mind. There was no reply. He was alone. The hunter stopped about 10 feet away. The neon light from above cast a sickly red glow, and for the first time, Kalen saw its face clearly. It was Elias Thorn's face, but it was a terrible, stripped-down version of it. All the warmth, the civility, the carefully constructed mask of the ambassador was gone. What remained was a visage of pure, cold, hyper-intelligent function. The eyes were the most terrifying part. They weren't angry or hateful. They were simply focused. They were the eyes of a creature that has successfully isolated its target and is now moving in for the kill. They held a terrifying, absolute certainty. In that face, Kalen saw the culmination of millions of years of evolution. He saw the wolf that isolates a caribou from the herd. He saw the eagle that spots a hare from 1,000 feet in the air. He saw the ancient human who patiently tracked a mammoth for days across the ice. He saw the silent, efficient predator that humanity had been for most of its existence, an instinct now buried beneath layers of civilization, but not, he horrifyingly realized, erased. It was still there, waiting. And he had woken it up. He finally understood the fundamental miscalculation his entire species had made. They had viewed non-telepathy as a weakness, a silence. They were wrong. It was camouflage. A telepathic species broadcasts its presence, its intentions, its fears. They were a species of prey animals, huddling together for safety in a shared consciousness. Humans, on the other hand, were silent. Their minds were their own. It was not a disability, it was a predatory advantage. It allowed the hunter to live inside them, undetected, dormant, until a threat presented itself. Their serene exteriors were the placid surface of a deep, dark ocean, and Kalen had been foolish enough to go for a swim. The hunter took another step. It didn't raise a weapon. It didn't need one. Its presence alone was a crushing force. Kalen felt his own psychic form beginning to discorporate under the pressure, his consciousness being squeezed into a single point of pure terror. This was how it ended. He would be extinguished here, in the dark recesses of a human mind, and footnote in an evolutionary history he had fatally misunderstood. With the last atom of his will, born not of courage, but of sheer, animalistic survival instinct, Kalen fought back. He didn't attack the hunter. That was futile. Instead, he turned all his energy inward, creating a violent psychic detonation centered on his own connection to this mind. He sought not to win, but to sever, to amputate the part of himself that was trapped here no matter the cost. The alley, the rain, the hunter, they all shattered into a billion shards of screaming light. Kalen's eyes snapped open. All three of them. He was back at the obsidian negotiation table. His body was convulsing violently, his three arms flailing, knocking over a carafe of water. A high-pitched, keening sound escaped his vocalizer, a sound no Zylosian had made in centuries. Across the table, Ambassador Elias Thorne had not moved. He simply watched Kalen's breakdown with a placid expression. He raised a single eyebrow. "Are you quite all right, Mindweaver Kalen?" Thorne's voice was calm, concerned, the perfect mask of a diplomat. "You seem distressed." As Kalen's vision swam back into focus, he saw it. Just for a fraction of a second before it was gone, veiled once more by civility. In the ambassador's eyes, he saw the hunter. The same cold, analytical, predatory intelligence. It looked at him, not with the overt threat of the mindscape, but with a flicker of something far more chilling: recognition. And perhaps a sliver of disappointment, like a predator whose prey had escaped the trap at the last possible moment. The moment passed. Thorne's expression softened back into one of polite concern. Zylosian aides rushed to Kalen's side, their minds a frantic buzz of alarm and confusion. They helped him to his feet, his limbs trembling uncontrollably. As they guided him from the room, Kalen looked back at Elias Thorne. The ambassador was calmly picking up the overturned carafe, his movements smooth and economical. He was tidying up, putting things back in order. Later, in the sterile white medbay of the Zylosian vessel, Lyra's concerned thoughts were a gentle balm on his fractured psyche. "What happened, Kalen? Your psychic signature was nearly extinguished." "I felt," she hesitated, "a presence. Something cold." Kalen lay on the diagnostic couch, staring at the stardusted black of the viewport, where the blue and white marble of Earth was visible. His own thoughts were broken, scarred. "They are not silent," Kalen projected, his thought voice a ragged whisper. "They are quiet. I don't understand. We have been wrong about all of it," he continued, the full, soul-crushing weight of his discovery settling upon him. "Their lack of telepathy is not a void. It is a veil. It's a hunting blind. It allows them to cultivate a benign surface, a mask of reason and civility, while the truth of their nature slumbers beneath." He shuddered, the memory of the hunter's eyes burned into his consciousness. "I went looking for leverage, for weakness. I found a weapon, a subconscious, instinctual defense mechanism so perfect, so ruthless, it's a wonder they haven't conquered the galaxy by accident. It doesn't just defend, it studies, it adapts. It hunts." He closed his eyes, but the images of the war zone, the jungle, and the alley were still there. They were part of him now. "I broke into Thorne's mind to read him," Kalen whispered, the horror of the final revelation dawning. "But all I did was teach it how to read me. We think we are negotiating with farmers and poets. We are negotiating with a species that has perfected the art of the ambush, not just in the physical world, but in the landscape of thought itself. We came here to talk. We had no idea we were stepping into a predator's territory." Lyra was silent for a long moment, processing the terrifying implications. The cerulean drift, the trade routes, the entire foundation of their diplomatic approach to humanity. It all seemed like a child's game now. Did the ambassador know? Lyra finally asked. Was he consciously aware of what was happening to you? Kalen looked out at the distant, beautiful Earth. He thought of Thorne's calm expression, the flicker in his eyes, the economical way he cleaned up the spilled water. Was it a conscious act of psychic defense? Or was it something deeper, an automatic, instinctual response from a sleeping giant he had accidentally prodded? Which possibility was more terrifying? The one where a man could consciously command such a monster? Or the one where the monster was always there, just beneath the surface of every single human, waiting patiently for a threat to reveal itself? Kalen didn't have an answer. And that uncertainty, he knew, would haunt him and his species for the rest of their days. They had sought to understand humanity's secrets, and in doing so had discovered one so profound it threatened to unravel their entire understanding of the galaxy. They weren't dealing with the silent ones. They were dealing with the silent hunters, and the hunt had just begun.